Greetings and welcome to the Missions Podcast, the show that explores your hard questions on missions, theology, and practice to help goers think and thinkers go. I'm Alex Kochman, Director of Communications and Media with ABWE, joined as always by Scott Dunford, pastor of Redeemer Church in Fremont, California. Scott, how are you and your house guests, those who have been listening to the show recently? Remember that you're hosting some refugees in your home. Ministering with ABWE in that way. How's that going?
Well, I think it's a learning curve for all of us. I'm learning how good Afghan food can be. They're learning how noisy a dog can be. I think they're still pretty much terrified of our dog, our sweet golden doodle puppy, who's just like nothing but a teddy bear, but they're terrified. And just sorting through all those cultural adjustments. The son is now in high school and he's loving it and he's doing well. And so, yeah, there's definitely a learning curve, but I'm so thankful. And the Afghan church here in Fremont is growing, and this couple is a huge part of it. So thank you for everyone at ABWE who's supporting this initiative, giving you this initiative. I hope more people will get involved because the impact that one Christian family makes in this community is huge.
Well, speaking of family as well, now, Scott, I won't speak for you, but you're living in California. You've got four kids. Of course, one you just married off. And then we've got three kids here. We're in the middle of it. We're in the thick of it. I don't have quite the lifespan or the perspective to say this with any degree of authority, but I will say in certain ways it's gotten harder to parent. And parenting is especially difficult in ministry. I'm sure how do you feel about that? You agree?
Yeah, I do agree. There's more influences that are harder for you to control as a parent than ever before. And that definitely makes it more difficult than I think it was, in times past.
So, Scott, what do you say we bring in an expert? So sitting here with me here in the studio, we have another live in-studio guest, is the one and only Cheryl Winget, who is the MK Ministries or MK Education Coordinator?
MK Education Coordinator.
MK, so Missionary Kid, MK, Missionary Kid Education Coordinator.
Right. Serving
with ABWE in the member care division, care team.
The breakdown is member care, and then we have MK Ministries, and I'm under that. So it's
very good. And you and your family served in Hungary for almost 28 years.
Almost 28 years, yeah.
And now you're here, and you've been back here in the headquarters ministering to families for about a year.
About a year.
Very good.
Yeah.
Well, we're glad to have you today. So obviously parenting is hard enough, much less parenting on the mission field. So I'd imagine part of your passion for this, if not all of your passion for this, comes from your own story. Give us a little bit of a taste of that story and what led you into this type of ministry here at home now.
Well, when my husband Steve and I went to Budapest in 1994, our children were 5 and 7. And we have a daughter and a son. Daughter is the older of the two. And one of our first thoughts when we decided to go to the mission field, when we prayed about it, sought God's wisdom, what is the wisest use of our gifts? And that was kind of our impetus for going. We saw that we could hopefully make a difference there. But what effect will this have on our children? And we thought about it, prayed about it, got really, really good counsel, I think, before we went. That was a good thing. Another part of it is I work with children with special needs. My doctorate's in special educational psychology. And
that's right. I ought to have introduced you as Dr. Cheryl Winget.
I don't say that for any accolade, of course. It's just that is what got me into what I'm doing. When our son was in the 2nd grade in Hungarian school, his teacher came to me and she felt like he maybe had dyslexic problems. And eventually we got a dyslexic diagnosis and it just changed everything for us. So that's really took me into the MK ministry part of what we did.
Well, praise God. Yeah. Glad you're here.
Yeah.
So, we've raised kids on the mission field. We've been around a lot of missionaries. We realize there's a lot of ways that people can go with education. There's also some unique challenges to that for sure, that just people in the States, even though it's hard in the States, I mean, I feel like, and I think Alex would agree, like raising kids here and trying to figure out educational options here are difficult. But what are some of the unique challenges that missionaries face both in raising and educating their children overseas?
Well, I think, Scott, that, well, first of all, I'm going to break that down. Raising children anywhere in the world, as you said, is difficult. I think that there is a special challenge for missionary children and for missionary parents. I'm not saying it's harder, or it's just different. It is. And I think that for everyone, missionaries and people who just live in the United States or wherever, expectations, huge. Making sure you're not making excuses for your children, getting to know your children well, knowing that you can't parent every child the same, even within the same family. I think that's really important. I was just having a conversation yesterday with a friend who challenged me with a project that I'm working on, and that is setting up your children for success, teaching them manners. That sounds so trite and easy, but teaching children to look people in the face when they're speaking with them, just those sorts of things.
Cheryl, I mean, when you were raising your kids in Hungary, were there different manners in Hungary than they had in America? I know we dealt with that.
Absolutely.
Because there was different manners of what was expected in Chinese at the table than there was in America. And we actually had a rule that said when you're eating American food, you follow American manners. When you're eating Chinese noodles, slurp them all you want. I'm curious how you handled that.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. Teaching them the manners of the culture in which they find themselves. And we had to explain to our children about how to hold utensils, for example. It's different in Hungary a little bit than in the United States. And you just adapt to where you are and explain. We're not being hypocritical about this.
Right.
We want to, in honor, prefer others and make them comfortable as well. As far as the education part goes, there are some real challenges. You have to know, just as I said, parenting children within the same family, sometimes you're going to do that a little bit differently. Following the same basic rules and the basic guidelines of Scripture, of course, but just knowing personalities and learning styles really come into that paradigm when you're choosing a school or an educational method for your child. Some children thrive in online learning. Some need one-on-one. Some children, if they do have some sort of a special need, you need to find the right educational therapist or occupational therapist, speech therapist, the right tutor to come alongside that child. So you have to really know your children, and there's not just their personalities, though that's huge, but their learning style as well.
Now, one of the other things, and I want to drill deeper on everything that you just said, you also raised children to adulthood, and they came back to the States for education, for college.
Yeah.
What was that transition like academically, personally, spiritually? It's not just the adjustment of being on the field, it's also coming off.
Right. I spoke with our adult children about this just recently. And one thing that our son said was he thanked me for introducing him and our daughter as well, and having enough time to understand a little bit about the American culture that they were coming back to. They spent enough time that they understood maybe some of the social mores of
we have those
back.
still.
This is several years ago.
Yeah, right.
That I think another thing is finding like an interest inventory for children coming back to the States to help them find the right university.
What is an interest inventory?
An interest inventory is just a test that you can take, something that will ask you the questions that will help you come to terms with what you're really interested in, the direction you would like to go, like say in a major. I don't have a statistic on it, but I can tell you this. A lot of MKs change majors.
Oh, yeah.
A lot.
A lot of Ks change majors.
True. But I think finding that interest, finding out what their passion is, I think is something that it can help them if they can get in the right school and the right environment. Taking visits back to the United States to look at colleges. I know that some people go on like college trips. Actually, our region sponsored a college trip for, I think it was, I don't know, it was all the high school students or juniors and seniors, I can't remember, but they knew what colleges that they were very interested in going to. Neither of our children graduated from the first university that they attended, but basically some good experiences there. Yeah.
So let's zoom back out. So what's just some general counsel that you give to parents or parents-to-be that are on the field or heading to the field, just about raising godly young adults on the field and with all the unique pressures there, but godly, servant-hearted, well-educated, well-adjusted. What are just some of the general encouragements that you give to parents?
A lot of people say God is my first priority, and I totally agree with that. Then ministry is my second priority, and of course family is right there. My idea, and I think it's biblical, and I have talked to several people about this. I just did a workshop on this in the summertime, and
which I heard was very well received. You came to our annual conference in July.
Yeah, it was fun.
Yeah,
I guess it was well received. It was fun.
If you have fun, that's half the battle.
Yeah, right. I think that you have to think of your family as ministry, and you put it right there on the same line as teaching, preaching, church planning. Your family is your ministry. A lot of MKs that I've talked to have felt like maybe they were a third rung. Ministry, mom and dad put the ministry before them. And I think that investing in your children, I know that with, and I don't want to keep referring to our family, but it's the one I know the best, of course. My husband came in one day when I was teaching Bible to our children. We were homeschooling one year. And he said, I want to be their Bible teacher. And from about our daughter.
What were you saying?
I was saying, thank you. Go for it.
Whatever she was teaching that day.
I said, this is great. And he did it from the time our children were in about 4th and 5th grade until they went to International Christian School in Budapest. So all of those years, for our daughter, it was between 5th grade and 10th grade, 11th grade, something like that.
Yeah.
My husband was her Bible teacher.
Yeah.
And I think that input, that investment that he made with our children, I think it was just remarkable.
That's beautiful.
Yeah. Like I said a while ago, having high expectations, explaining why we do things, if you can. Sometimes you can't. But if you can explain to them why we are doing certain things in ministry and life, I think that information is always good, or usually good. Sometimes you can't. Sometimes you have to be guarded. Being an example, if you're going to say you need to be in the Word and praying daily, they need to see you doing that. I think that that's pretty important. Living the life. If you say don't speak poorly of people, don't gossip, you probably shouldn't be talking about your teammates or your team leader. Being an example, because that hypocrisy is a germ. And just those kinds of things. Teaching them God's Word, living God's Word before them. A huge part is praying. And I know that sounds trite, and it shouldn't sound trite, but we should be on our knees praying specifically for each child, just like we should know each child and know their bents educationally and personality-wise. That's how we should pray. Pray for my child. This child struggles with this. This one struggles with that, and pray specifically.
Scott, I know you've got a listener letter to read, and I want to ask Cheryl about that, but to kind of set you up a little bit, Scott, I recently had a conversation, and I know you visited a missions training school recently as well, too. And I do think there's maybe a little bit of a tension sometimes in the missions world, because on the one hand, sacrifice, do the hard thing. Sometimes family does have to be sacrificed, or at least family makes sacrifice. Maybe you're not literally sacrificing family itself for the sake of ministry, but there is a real sort of counting the cost that has to happen, right? But then also we want to care for our missionaries well, care for their families well. We want to make sure that they have the best while they're sacrificing, right? There's a little bit of a tension there. Do I send them off to boarding school, or do we do something else that's more specialized, more individualistic? And sometimes we run into more personal problems of resistance from our kids, right, Scott?
Yeah, so we got a comment from one of our listeners on our page, our Facebook page, but I think it captures a kind of question I've heard before. I know that some agencies don't even allow families to go for the first time with older children. ABWE does on a case-by-case basis. And a parent asks a question, just about a child that is struggling with the parent's call to the field. And the question, and this mother is trying to encourage this child to say, hey, you need to obey your parents, and God's calling the mom and dad to go. And so you should go. So I'm just wondering what you would say to that. How would you give counsel to a parent who's struggling with especially a teenage child who's not sure if God's calling them to the field, and yet mom and dad are already signed up, they're ready to go. In this case, they're already pre-field ministry, and the kids are having second thoughts about it. What kind of advice would you give to a mother or father about that?
When we decided to go, our children were 2 and 3. So yeah. I don't really have any personal experience with that in our family. But
they resisted going to the field at first, but they took a nap and they were fine.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Yes.
Throw a peanut butter and jelly sandwich at them. I think, though, seriously, that is something you have to pray about and think about as you are making a decision. You need to think of the family dynamics. Once again, knowing each child, knowing their bents, and praying over it. To begin with, is this a really wise decision for my family? And sometimes I have known people who have said, yeah, we're planning to do this. And then they had to rethink it. And so that is something to consider when you're talking with a child, a teenager in particular, who is saying, yet I'm not called to do this. He's still part of the family. He's still, of course, under the authority. But I think, Alex, I heard you mention something about knowing the heart of the child. Is it coming from a rebellious point of view, or is it coming from a fearful point of view? I don't know if I can do this. I don't want to leave my friends. What's it going to be like? Those sorts of things. So I think great communication.
Yeah, because you're going to treat rebellion and fear very differently.
Exactly.
Right.
As you would for any other decision you have to make in your family.
Right.
But I think just communicating, I think that getting good counsel, there are plenty of excellent counselors that could sit down and talk with your child.
And there's no shame in that.
And there is absolutely no shame in that. And there are just so many good resources now for that kind of thing. Pulling your pastor in, if it's appropriate. I know that in some cases that might be intimidating for the teenager, but it might be maybe his youth director. It might be another mentor. Yeah. But I would definitely pray and communicate for sure.
If I can, jump in, there's a lot of factors that go into this on parents and kids' sides. On the parent side, especially once you've gone through all that pre-field stuff, like there's a pressure and a humiliation if you back out. And I want to say to a parent that may be listening about this topic, it's okay to back out of going to the field if you feel like there's a factor you had not considered. And I mean, obviously that's a big step and you shouldn't do it lightly, but it's better to do it now than to get to the field, invest all that time and energy, have your teammate invested, and then greatly disrupt the ministry that's happening on the field because you're a year into it, you realize, wow, we can't go forward.
And Scott, let me interject. This would be my concern, especially working with MKs. They're going to feel guilty the rest of their lives. I pulled my mom and dad off of the field. And so if you can figure that out before going, I think it's far financially, emotionally, but especially with your MKs. You don't want them to turn against the parents and God.
Yeah.
I think that's one factor. I'm really thankful for what you interjected there. So, parents, if you're listening, it's okay. Everything that Cheryl said about getting all these different people's advice. And if you end up having to back out, don't let embarrassment keep you from doing what you need to do to care for your kids. it'll be worse if you don't.
Right.
But like what Cheryl said with fear, there could be things as simple as you may need to build into your budget a couple more trips before you go. And with a teenage kid, they need to feel comfortable. Like, they're thinking through, like, can I make friends there? And will this be my home? And what's going to happen to my friends back here that a 1 or 2 year old aren't thinking about at all? They'll make friends wherever you take them, but it's hard and they'll feel lonely. And so helping them, it may take more steps, and there'll be a lot of voices in your head and your ear that you need to just tune out and do what's right for your family. And, all those resources that Cheryl pointed out, talking to your pastor, talking to other missionaries on the field, talking to your team leader. Maybe it's a time for you to step out and do some North America-based every ethne work for a while until your kids are in college and a little more established, and then you can go overseas. But what could happen, Cheryl, as someone who's been in the field a long time, have you ever seen people have to leave the field because of issues with their children?
I've seen that some.
Yeah.
I'd like to tell you, though, about a couple ideas that I have that I didn't say before. Yeah. They just came to mind. You just piqued that in my thinking.
Go for it. Lay it out.
For one, getting your child involved in a ministry in the United States. You said every ethne, but pulling your child into something, not making them, not pushing it on them, but finding, again, communication, knowing what their interests are, and saying, hey, let's do that ministry together. And it would kind of warm them up toward ministry opportunities. Yeah. A family, I'd rather speak about a family that I know where it was successful. And I think that this is a great example. Pat and Tina Kirby came to Hungary, and Anna, their daughter, who is now an ABWE missionary in Hungary, traveled with them on their survey trip. And the other girls were a little bit younger, but she was at that point in high school, and she came on the survey trip, and she saw it all. They went to several different countries, and I think just involving them, like you said, going on maybe an extra survey trip, spending that little extra time and money to see what it would be like. Take them to the schools, the possibility of seeing where you might go to this school. It could be a Hungarian school if you're in Hungary. You could go to an international school, perhaps. Our children were homeschooled, did national school, and did American school before we went to preschool. But then they both graduated from International Christian School. So even just visiting, taking students to the options and showing them, meeting the nationals and the other missionary kids on the field to see, like you said, Scott, if they can make friends there, if they're gonna feel comfortable. Our children, we had such great MKs that our kids grew up with. I could name so many of them, and there was really a bond there with that group of children. And it was almost immediate. Now, they were little, but even as older children came to us, we had several that came as middle school, high school, and they made friends, but they made the survey trip.
I think you can be honest with your kids about there's going to be real great gains that you get from being a missionary kid. Every missionary kid I've ever talked to, they do talk about the huge benefits of living overseas, but there are some sacrifices. Yeah. Anytime you move for ministry's sake, it leaves some scars, and and I think being open and honest about those things. I think for pastors listening too, I just want to say, engage on this level and understand that the pre-field missionaries are dealing with a lot of internal and external pressures. They're trying to live up to the expectations of so many people, but also wrestling through all this fear and anxiety and a lot of things to manage on their own, and pastors that can come alongside and help them process and regularly let them talk through it together and identifying what those challenges might be, and then being gracious and helping them figure those things out, giving them permission. Because there's always going to be someone in your church Sorry, I'm getting on a hobby horse here because you're getting me excited about this, Cheryl. Really appreciate this so much. But there's always going to be some retired missionary in the church or in the community that's complaining every time the missionary comes home or does something that they wouldn't have done with their kids back in the day when they sent them off to boarding school and didn't see them for 4 years. And as a pastor could help the missionary by helping them to tune out some of those voices and helping them think through carefully, like how to make healthy, godly, wise choices. So I would encourage pastors to lean into this. And missionaries, if your pastor isn't doing it naturally, reach out to them and say, listen to this episode. And Dr. Winget, Dr. Cheryl has got great advice here for us. I think we should all listen to this together and take a step forward. What do you think? And that'd be some of my advice.
I think also planning your furloughs well, especially for older children. Something that we did when we came back, our children, I think, were middle school. Maybe our daughter was a freshman in high school. I can't remember. But we went shopping before they went to church for the first time. And they took friends with them. And so they knew more of really what to buy and how to dress and a little bit of that, so that when they walked in to the first time they ever went to youth group, the youth pastor he was very wise. He didn't race up to him and say, "Oh, you're the missionary," that sort of thing. Like, "Hey, how you doing? What's your name?" "Oh, yeah, cool. Come over here." That kind of thing, just really easing them into it. So I think it's not just the pastor, but the paradigm is being sent out by the church.
Right.
And so it's the youth pastor, it's the Sunday school teachers, it's all the children's minister at our church a long time ago, right before our first furlough, and our kids were still in elementary school. She took a camcorder, back in the day, into children's church, and the children all said hi and they made this little video, and they said their names because people change over 4 years, especially children, and then sent that to us. And so when our children went back, they knew a lot of the children's faces and their names and that sort of thing. So it's not just, I agree with you, Scott, that it is the pastor, but it's the church. And
That's
it's
good.
led by the pastor. It trickled right down to children's church.
That's wonderful.
Well, let's bring it in for a little bit of a landing, but I'm going to bring up something else. We could keep going on this.
Yeah.
We could drill really deep into this topic, but we know that your heart is also especially special needs
Absolutely.
children. I think kind of the elephant in the room of that question, and you recently wrote an article for the Gospel Coalition along these lines, is should I even serve on the field at all if my child has any level of special needs? And I don't want us to just be thinking narrowly on special needs, diagnosed sorts of things, because we also know, you look at the statistics, we kind of have a mental health crisis at a national level anyway. More and more, all sorts of parents are noticing that their children are experiencing certain things, often diagnosable, often not diagnosed. But again, that goes back to it's a really hard time to parent, right? So should you even go to the field in a situation like that?
Yeah.
If you're ready to pay the cost, if you're not ready to pay the cost, how would you approach that?
Well, I can think of a family, an ABWE family. They were very interested in serving in Central Eastern Europe, and they were personal friends of our family. And during the process, they were expecting a baby. And when the child was born, she had a Down's syndrome diagnosis. So they really had to grapple with, can we go to the mission field with a child with a Down's diagnosis? And they found a good school that had services that could just meet the needs of that particular child. I believe they were in the school for maybe, I don't know, first grade through 8th grade, something like that. And then it became obvious that maybe something else was needed. We've had several children that I've worked with at International Christian School Budapest that were in our supplemental services program like that. So I think finding the right school, finding the right program within the right school. If you have a child with a special need, check around to see what kind of supplemental services or special education programs are that are available in the school system. Either, and it can be in the public school system. I would say probably an international school might be the best because it would be in English.
Right.
And you don't want to throw in a foreign language
right.
into that. I think that it can definitely be done, but I think it has to be done with great wisdom, a lot of research, going to the field. This family that I mentioned actually came and did a short term to see how is this going to work, and then came back as long-term servants.
Yeah, you can always try before you buy, right?
Yeah. And it worked out well. Information resources. Yeah. One thing you can do, we were talking about this a while ago, a lot of changes occur when you go to the mission field, obviously.
Right.
You're in a new place, new school, new language, sometimes a new culture, that sort of thing. And sometimes you can quickly say, my child is struggling. I wonder if there is a problem. I wonder if there's learning disability, autism, ADHD, those kinds of things. And I would encourage people, if they have a doubt, if they have an inkling that there might even be a problem, or even if not, we have a missionary family. I can't say their name. They're in a limited access country, who said, "No, my child doesn't struggle, but I want a baseline."
Right.
And so they received some diagnostic testing for that, so that they can have something to compare when they are in a new culture.
How would you know if they're struggling if you don't have something to compare it to? Yeah, proactively testing before you leave.
Yeah, I'm not saying everybody needs that. I'm just saying that if you have that inkling, or sometimes it's educators who feel that way about their children.
Yeah. It would be weird, strange, if you see if you agree. I think it would be strange if a kid didn't struggle. On some level, you're being thrown into a new culture. You've undergone the trauma of loss of home and friends and relationships. You're operating in a new language oftentimes. Yeah. Struggle is normal.
Struggle is hard.
And that's okay.
And they're going to reflect parents too.
Unfortunately, they do. I've learned that.
Parents take the lead on that.
That's what makes my kids so difficult for my wife to care for during the day while I'm at work. They reflect me a little bit too much. Cheryl, you mentioned resources. So before we go, where would you point people for more resources from you, or places that you'd recommend?
Okay, for ABWE, we have a brand new email address for MK Education. Shiny new.
Off the assembly line.
Yeah, just this week. I believe it's working now. It is that new. It's within the last week. And the address is, I wish I could put it up here on a card or something, but
we can throw that in the lower third right now.
Cool.
Right here. You're seeing it right here. Roughly in this space. It's happening right now if you're watching on YouTube. There you go. Look, I just did that with my magical powers.
Got it. It's mkeducation@abwe.org.
mkeducation@abwe.org. But what if I'm not an ABWE missionary, Cheryl? Even Scott can remember that. But what if I'm not ABWE?
You can still write me about any of your questions.
Our lives and possessions are for sharing.
Well, we are all in the body of Christ, and we do serve. Actually, I just met somebody yesterday and had this very conversation with them. Anything I can do to help you, please, and gave them some resources from our library here.
Love that.
Yeah.
Very good.
That, I would make sure, this is one thing before going to the mission field, and this might go back to what we were talking about a while ago, as in choosing a field even, or taking children overseas, making sure that if they have a speech problem, if they have some kind of a sensory problem where they need an occupational therapist, finding the right schools, and again, the right diagnosis before they go, if you feel like that is an issue. I think that's pretty important. Yeah. So to answer your question, then to speak with a speech therapist or an occupational therapist, getting resources from them, reading everything you can read.
Yeah. Because the goal is for your family to sacrifice to be on the field, not to sacrifice your family on the field. Very good. Cheryl, thank you for joining us. Dr. Cheryl Winget, we appreciate you so much. And we appreciate you. Whether you watch, whether you listen, thank you for joining the Missions Podcast. You can help other people benefit from this topic. And we know this is kind of a specific topic, but imagine that this is something that there's a certain group of people that's really going to resonate with this and needs this. You can pay it forward by sharing it with a friend, somebody you think will be benefited, will be blessed by it. And if you share, rate, review the show in your favorite podcast platform, that will help other people discover it as well. Of course, we value your partnership. It's at this time of year that we're looking at budgets, and we want to make sure we're able to continue to bring you this great content. So go to missionspodcast.com.
Please do that.
Scott is begging you. He's begging you. missionspodcast.com/support. Again, that's missionspodcast.com/support. And so again, until next week's episode, thank you for watching and thank you for joining us on the Missions Podcast. Bye-bye.